Greetings once again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Efren225, and today I will be starting a brand new normal playthrough. No gimmicks this time. It's not a Fire Emblem stream where I'm always messing everything up, and it's not a chess video where I pretend to be smart. Just gonna be a basic playthrough of an old classic. This time it's a Zelda game, as you can see. Link seems to have forgotten to unequip his metal equipment in a thunderstorm. That's a basic beginner mistake. Yes, I've been playing Tears of the Kingdom a lot lately. That's what's been keeping me busy. Top class Zelda game, and it definitely got me into a Zelda mood. More so than Breath of the Wild did. I'm gonna have to review those two games eventually. But no, this time it's gonna be Link's Awakening, the deluxe version on the Game Boy Color to be precise. Definitely a very important game in the Zelda franchise, and something that I think has been more or less forgotten at this point. Well, not completely forgotten. This game got a remake on the Switch in 2019, but I don't want to bother with it, honestly. It seems like just another remake of a Zelda game from ages ago, and I have the original. So this is my preference. It's going to be Link's Awakening Deluxe on the Game Boy Color, which is technically the 4th revision of Link's Awakening. Yeah, this is actually a bit of trivia for you guys. This is actually the 4th version of Link's Awakening. There is, of course, the original, and it sold so well that there were actually 2 additional print runs of the game, the 1.1 version and the 1.2 version. Ah yes, and we also have Easter eggs already. If you input your name as Zelda on the file select screen, you get this nice little remix of the classic Zelda theme. Anyways, there were actually a couple of other Easter eggs on the file select screen in the international versions of the game, but this is the US version, so we don't get any of those, unfortunately. So I said this was the 4th revision of the game. It's not too uncommon back in those days for games to get an additional print run if they do exceptionally well, and Link's Awakening did very, very well. The development history of this game is very, very interesting, as a matter of fact. So, this actually started off as a port of A Link to the Past to the Game Boy that the original developers were just working on when they weren't working on official projects at the time. They just decided to mess around with the Game Boy development kit and make a port of A Link to the Past just to get used to the technology. That, of course, eventually transitioned into being a full Zelda title, and one that actually does a lot of weird things with the concept of a Zelda game. For example, here's a house where the owner keeps a giant chain chomp from the Mario series as a pet. Yes, there's going to be a lot of cameos from other Nintendo games. As I'm sure you will soon see, Link's Awakening has a lot of cameos from other games, which were probably holdovers from when the project was unofficial and they could do this kind of thing as much as they wanted. But the cameos stayed when the game transitioned to being a full Zelda title. So I mentioned that this game is very influential in the rest of the franchise. The idea of equipping items to your different buttons actually started in this game and not Ocarina of Time. And there's a bunch of other stuff from Ocarina of Time that you can see as having their roots in this game. And of course, I just have to do this, right? I have to push the Gordo-looking enemy from Kirby into the sword so that when I pick up the sword and Link does his scripted spin attack, it'll actually kill the enemy in the cutscene. Just as soon as Mr. Owl over here gets done telling us how many licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. Spoiler alert, he never made it without biting. Yes, an annoying owl with a bunch of exposition dumps for you is also something that originated in Link's Awakening. Gosh, though, I should probably stop making it seem like you should blame this game for everything wrong with Ocarina of Time. Speaking of Ocarina of Time, I actually do have a playthrough of that game on this channel, but it's very old, very outdated. It was made when YouTube still had annotations, which was such a great feature, and also you can get Link to moonwalk sometimes. Yeah, the coding in Link's Awakening is not really super polished, so there's weird moments where you can get Link to moonwalk, and this is the deluxe version, so a couple of bugs are fixed, but the initial releases of Link's Awakening had some of the craziest bugs you've ever seen. It rivals the first generation of Pokemon, as a matter of fact, but I don't want to take advantage of any of that. I want to play through Link's Awakening normally. Actually, considering this is a Zelda game and I just got done playing Tears of the Kingdom, maybe this playthrough will turn out to be significantly not normal. I suppose we'll just have to see how it plays out. Anyways, there's not a lot you can do in the village with no money, so we'll have to collect some rupees before we're able to do anything. But you can cut through the bushes and fall through a hole to get the first piece of heart, only a bunch more of those to go. Now then, there are a couple of other items you can find in the village, but I'll save that for later. Let's head into the forest first. And as we enter the forest, you will notice that the colors transition from broad daylight to much, much darker colors. This is something that only the Game Boy Color could have done back in the day, so it's actually a really neat detail. I'm seeing most of the deluxe version stuff for the first time. I had the regular versions as a kid. I had actually thought my original copy of the game was irreversibly wrecked because I had corrupted the save or something, but then years later I actually dug it out and booted it up again, and it turns out that I just had to make a regular save and delete the old files, and then everything would have been A-OK. Anyways, we're in the forest now, and one of the weird things Link's Awakening does is that there are power-ups that the enemies can drop. This is the Guardian Acorn. It halves all damage you take for a brief period of time. I think it lasts until you enter a cave or something or get hit a certain number of times. I'm actually not sure. Anyways, it seems to wear off the instant you enter the cave because the music goes back to normal, and I wish it hadn't worn off because then I would have saved myself from a little bit of embarrassment trying to get past these keys. They're just regular keys. How are they hurting me that bad? Anyways, those things that I broke with my sword are apparently crystals, and I don't think there's any indication you can break those with your sword, but there you go. It is technically a wooden sword, so I don't really know how it can smash through stuff so easily, but there it is. So you have to go through this cave to get a mushroom, which is one of the links, if you will, back to A Link to the Past. Remember, this game was going to be a remake of A Link to the Past at first, so there are some quests that resemble A Link to the Past, and getting the mushroom and having it turned into magic powder is one of those things. And of course, you have to be very careful as you push the blocks, otherwise you have to re-enter the cave all over again, and the enemies do respawn. Something that's annoying is that enemies can only ever drop 1 rupee at a time. Even though they look blue, they're actually just green rupees, which are worth 1 apiece. So something that's also noteworthy about Link's Awakening is, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the plot at all, but this game doesn't take place in Hyrule, and in fact they omit all characters from A Link to the Past. They just do completely new stuff with Link's Awakening, and that's pretty cool. Of course, the monsters are still Moblins, Octoroks, and other stuff, but I think it's pretty cool that they were brave enough to not use Hyrule as a setting for one game. Of course, you still find triangles, apparently. This is the Piece of Power. It is the other power-up item, and it drastically increases the power of your sword. Look at what I just did to those enemies. That is impressive. This thing is overpowered, and I actually think it made the game a lot easier for me. If you can find them at the right time, of course, it's going to be a lot easier for you, but I just happened to find them with such timing that I think I decimated some of the bosses because of it. Anyways, what you do with the mushroom is you take it to the witch and she makes you some magic powder, just like in A Link to the Past. And the magic powder is actually going to be mandatory for progression through the forest, so it's a good thing we can get it here. And you can try it out on that torch. It lights up torches in this game. I don't think it did that in A Link to the Past. That was something that the lantern did, but there's no lantern in this game, so I guess they are making up for the lack of items by giving their functions to other items, which is fine. Ah yes, you can do this in A Link to the Past though. Using the magic powder on that particular enemy causes it to change into whatever that is supposed to be, and you can even talk to him. He doesn't really have all that much that's interesting to say in this version of the game, but the various translations of Link's Awakening give him some questionable dialogue, let's say, and sometimes they replace it with hints to things that are not easy to find in the game. And seeing that Easter egg now actually reminds me, in the Satellaview Zelda game, Ancient Stone Tablets, which, if you don't know what that is, please look it up, it's actually quite fascinating, you can try that trick on the same enemy and it will actually have a reference to Link's Awakening in its dialogue. I actually can't remember if Satellaview Zelda came out after Link's Awakening. It was actually a pretty long time after the original, is when this sort of sequel to A Link to the Past came out. Anyways, the reason we needed the magic powder is because without it, this little joker decides to pull Lost Woods on you. This screen will loop indefinitely until you throw the magic powder on this guy, after which he spins around for quite a while and turns into Mario. Or Terran, as he's known in this game. Yeah, this whole thing was a thinly veiled Mario reference. The mushroom turning into a raccoon, which are things Mario does, and also the design of that character. Anyways, now that the raccoon is gone, we can get the tail key. This will open the first dungeon. Link's Awakening is weird in that it is the first Zelda game to have you collecting keys in order to open dungeons, and they really don't do this in most of the other Zelda games except for the 2 Oracle games, which use the same engine as Link's Awakening, but with a lot more polish. So we'll be collecting a couple keys to get into the dungeons, and you don't get a key for every dungeon, but it's also noteworthy that Link's Awakening is the first game to kind of have a sort of pre-dungeon quest to go on in order to get access to the dungeon. I mean, you could say that A Link to the Past had this as well, but sometimes you don't need to do much in order to get into the dungeon. It might just be sitting there open and waiting for you. Having said that, however, we are not going to the dungeon right away. First, there are a couple things I'd like to get done in town. So on this screen, you can cut through the bushes to find the first secret sea shell. Sorry, I did not want to mispronounce that. Secret seashell. I get those mixed up so often. Secret seashells are the gold skulltulas of this game, basically. There are about 20 of them throughout the game world that you can collect, and if you collect a lot of them, something good might happen. Anyways, it's minigame time. Apparently this town has a crane game minigame. And right in the center there, which is very easy to pick up, you just have to hold the B button for a certain amount of time and then hold the A button for a certain amount of time, and you can pick up the Yoshi doll. Yet another cameo, which we are waiting to slowly go down the conveyor belt so we can pick it up. Not much reason to play this game, those other prizes aren't really worth it, but the Yoshi doll actually kickstarts the trading side quest, which is not much of a side quest because it's actually mandatory for game progression. But yes, Link's Awakening introduced the first trading side quest, which would be followed up by Ocarina of Time's Biggoron Sword quest and other similar quests in the Oracle games. And in the shop, we can see that the shovel, which we need to progress, costs a lot of money. That's highly expensive and probably a ripoff, but I suppose I will have to come back after collecting 200 rupees. The first thing you can do with the Yoshi doll is give it to this woman who will exchange it for a pink bow. Now you can increase the damage of your normal type attacks. Oh wait, this isn't Pokemon. Actually, this is the second item in the trading quest, and you can trade it to someone in town. Now, who would you expect to trade it to? Certainly not a human. You actually have to give it to a miniature chain chomp. Yeah, apparently the woman in this house raises chain chomps. Makes you wonder if she's related to that woman from Super Mario Odyssey, the bunny that swings around a giant chain chomp, which actually becomes a weapon in Hyrule Warriors, if you can believe it. Yes, the third level of the ball and chain weapon is actually a giant chain chomp, and that was probably my favorite Easter egg in all of Hyrule Warriors. Actually, speaking of Hyrule Warriors, they actually added Marin, a character from this game, as a DLC fighter. What would Marin ever do to fight is beyond me. I'm actually going to have to look up a video of her in action after this. So the other minigame you can do is the fishing minigame, and there's just gotta be one of those in every Japanese RPG, right? Like, every adventure or RPG game has to have a fishing minigame if it's in Japan. It is mandatory. And I don't really like it that much. There's only one fish I'm really interested in capturing because the prize it gives is another heart piece. But it's very difficult to catch because the other fish keep eating your bait, even though they're not the ones you want. So after clearing out the entire pond and doing this really dumb thing where you cast your line and then carefully tap A and left in order to get the line close to the fish so you can actually catch the thing, you then have to mash, and I mean mash, the control pad, the A button, all of it. This fish does not like getting caught, and you might just hurt your wrist if you are not used to button mashing. Thankfully I am, so I managed to snag the heart piece, and then we get some really weird dialogue from the fisherman who suggests going to the sea to try and fish, and then he's all, you know what, forget about it, forget I said anything. Really, really odd. In fact, this whole game is odd. If you thought Majora's Mask was weird, you ain't seen nothing yet, honestly. Majora's Mask might have some weird enemies in it, but Link's Awakening has even more crazy moments. Like, I completely forgot to mention that the chain chomp I traded the bow to gave me dog food in return, and like, what am I supposed to do with dog food? Well, apparently you have to trade it to somebody for bananas. Yeah. Who could possibly want dog food other than a dog? Apparently some kind of crocodile, I want to say? I'm not actually sure. I always get alligators and crocodiles confused. But he really, really wants the dog food for some reason. You know, I have always wondered why our pets have specialized food. Maybe it has to do with their particular taste buds or whatever. But I don't know if a crocodile would ever eat dog food. And I don't know why he can't just settle for the many, many bunches of bananas he's got, but hey, if I get to take bananas and use them for something later on, so be it. I mean, I did tell you, the trade quest is actually mandatory in this game, so we do have to do all of the trades. Or I should say we have to do some of the trades, you know? You might find out what that means later on, you might not. It depends on if I can actually find out where I got this particular bit of information from. I have to do some more research on the matter. So, we are headed to the Tail Cave, which is the first dungeon. You just have to pass through this winding path, which is obstructed by holes. Holes in front of the dungeon, eh? Well, it's time for level 1. Link's Awakening has 8 dungeons prior to the final dungeon, much like Zelda 1. A Link to the Past had, like, 10 dungeons before the final dungeon, or even 11 before the final boss. You can't exactly fit that much onto a Game Boy cartridge. But maybe they could have if they had lessened the amount of text that plays whenever you pick up the compass. Yes, the compass in this game, for some reason, has this long, long dialogue box whenever you pick it up, and you have to pick it up 8 times because there are 8 dungeons with compasses in them. So, as the dialogue will tell you multiple times, whenever you enter a room with a key and you are holding the compass, a tone will play to let you know that there is a key in this room, which is pretty nice. I doubt the compass could really do much besides show you where the chests and boss are, so this is a good function to add, but they dropped it after the Oracle games. I haven't played Minish Cap in a long time, so maybe I'm forgetting that game as well. Anyways, you can also pick up the pieces of power and guardian acorns inside of dungeons, so that can make fighting enemies a lot easier. And you get a map in this room. Maps do exactly what you think they do. They show you where all the rooms are. It's not that useful. You can just explore on your own and fill out the map that way. So after killing all of the enemies in this classic Zelda kill room, you have to break through these crystals, and off to the left is a bombable wall, which is weird because you don't actually get bombs for quite a while, at least if you play the game like I did. I didn't get bombs in this video, spoiler alert. So you're probably wondering what the dungeon item of this dungeon is going to be. Well, it's certainly a new one for this point in the franchise. And to find it, you have to go through this room and push this block off to the right. And that will cause the door to open for some reason. And interestingly, we have enemies here that can only be defeated by flipping them over with a shield and then hitting them with the sword. That's interesting that they made the shield a lot more useful, considering that you have to put it onto a button in order to use it. So that's a good idea. And then you have literally Goombas. Yes, there are side-scrolling areas in Zelda now, and there are Goombas in this area, and if you defeat them the classic way, they'll give you a heart. If you kill them with a sword, they might give you a rupee, they might not. So the item you get in this dungeon is the Rock's Feather, which gives Link the ability to jump. Yes, if you thought Breath of the Wild was crazy for having a dedicated jump button, you just needed an item to do it in Link's Awakening. And that explains the side-scrolling areas, which are also interesting because the last time they had a side-scrolling area in Zelda was, well, basically the entirety of Zelda 2. And there are a couple of other games where they return to having the side-scrolling areas, but they don't really go back to the side-scrolling platforming style of Zelda anywhere else in the Zelda franchise. Like, they don't make it the focal point, as I mentioned in the Zelda 2 playthrough. So side-scrolling segments basically worked better for Zelda than they did for Metal Gear, let's put it that way. Yeah, I watched a Snake's Revenge video recently. So, exploring the rest of the dungeon, we just need to find that boss key. The boss key, unlike A Link to the Past, it doesn't unlock the chest containing the item that you get from the dungeon. They decided not to do that. But there are blocks that require keys to open, which is a little bit odd, but no matter. And if you want to put a locked door there without creating an entire separate room, then by all means, that's good enough for me. So we have the boss key, which will be detected by the compass, by the way, in case you were wondering. And in a short number of rooms, we will have the mini-boss of the dungeon, which is very close to the real boss. But before that, we have the playing card enemy slot machine things. I don't really know what they're called. you have to kill them by stopping them on the same suit, and I was thrown off just a little bit there because the order of the playing card suits on those enemies is not the same as the traditional order that I'm familiar with. The item I just got is the Stone Beak, which you can fit into the owl statues to have them talk to you and give you a gameplay hint. Oh, and here's the mini-boss, by the way. He goes down in 4 hits thanks to the Piece of Power. You just have to jump over that rolling thing that I can actually remember from the original Metal Gear, so there's going to be a lot of Metal Gear references in this playthrough as well, I suppose. And the first boss turns out to be a nightmare, if you will, from A Link to the Past. That goes down in 2 hits. Well, okay, that wasn't as much of a nightmare as he was in A Link to the Past. I swear, that has to be the Piece of Power at work, and the items that you're searching for in the dungeons are instruments. Here we have a cello. It's a cello. I don't really have anything much to say about instruments. I don't play any. But yes, you get a neat little tune on your particular instrument, and then we exit the dungeon. So, interesting note about the owl statues, by the way. In the original version of the game, they were actually just stone slabs, and you had to find the missing piece of the slab in order to read what was written on it. This was a little weird because there were multiple stone slabs in some dungeons, and only one stone slab that you actually had to find to get a hint. So changing it to an owl statue probably made more sense, which I don't really know why you would need that. This game doesn't really need to make much sense. It's Link's Awakening, it's really weird. But yeah, they don't actually do the owl statue thing again after the Oracle games. They kind of do it in the Oracle games, but it's not the same as having an entire extra item to find in the dungeon, so they don't really do the owl statue thing again after this. And it seems trouble has struck the village while we were away. This is actually interesting. Something else is happening in the world while you are doing your thing. It seems that the chain chomp that lady at the house owned has been kidnapped. How do you manage to kidnap a chain chomp? Well, I guess if they're tethered to that little stake in the ground, I guess there's not much they could do to avoid getting kidnapped if you decided to, say, lift the entire stake and run away with it. I suppose. But you're telling me the chain chomp, the big, scary monster, didn't resist in any fashion. Well, anyways, getting back to the part of the forest that we found the witch's hut in, you can now jump across these holes to pick up another piece of heart. You may have seen it on the way in here. And this is also the direction we need to go in next. So head through this area, and this cave, as it turns out, is where the Moblins' hideout is. So now we get to fight a bunch of Moblins, the most basic enemy in Zelda. Well, they're about to go down rather easily, I suppose. That first Moblin is the sword and shield variety. It will actually chase after you. And these Moblins, well, they kind of just stand around and shoot arrows off at you occasionally. I'm not picking up that Guardian Acorn, by the way. I don't want to mess up the music, and I definitely don't want to have to sit through another text box as the game tells me what the Guardian Acorn does. So this is the boss Moblin. He just shoots arrows at you and then rams into the wall. What you have to do is get him to ram into the wall, and then you hit him with your sword. And he has to actually be close to the wall when he does the ramming attack, otherwise he will not fall over like this. So, very vulnerable to a spin attack. I am unfortunately embarrassing myself because it turns out that holding your sword towards the enemy when you're not supposed to hit them until they've fallen over can cause some interesting things to happen sometimes. That's literally the first time I've ever seen that kind of thing happen. See, every time I play a game like this, I learn something new. It's really great to go back to old games sometimes. To say nothing of the tricks I'm learning in Tears of the Kingdom, but I'll save that for a review. Anyways, one more spin attack and the easiest boss in the game goes down rather easily. Actually, he's not even worthy of being called the boss. He's more like a mini-boss. He does drop a fairy after all. And now that we've saved Bow Wow the Chain Chomp, he now follows us around because apparently Link attaches the chain to his waist or something. I have no idea how this works. In Hyrule Warriors, he needed a pair of gauntlets in order to wield a ball and chain, but apparently he doesn't need that now. So you'll never guess what the next objective is. It is not, actually, to take the lost puppy, or what basically amounts to a lost puppy, home to its owner. You are actually supposed to use him to traverse the swamp and feed him a bunch of, really ugly-looking plants. Apparently, the only way to get past some of the plants in the swamp is for the Chain Chomp to eat them. Yes, Bow Wow can eat any enemy in the game in one bite, as he just demonstrated with that walking pile of pancakes formerly known as a like-like. It's pretty early in the game for like-likes to be showing up. So yes, he can eat the flowers here. Apparently he can't eat the guardian acorns though, that would be more helpful. And you can find a very easy chest to get with some extra money in it, getting very close to that 200 rupee goal in order to purchase the shovel. So you need Bow Wow in order to enter this dungeon, which is called the Bottle Grotto, which is a very good name for a dungeon full of bottles. But apparently, he doesn't come inside the dungeon with you. He'd have been useful for eating all of the enemies, but apparently Link just leaves him outside. That's irresponsible. Man, Link, I gotta say, you're one terrible pet owner. Anyways, the Bottle Grotto starts out very simple. Kill this enemy to get a key, and moonwalk some more. I'm always accidentally moonwalking. It's so weird. And we can use that key on this door. It is probably not worth your time to actually use the key on this door, because what you find in here is not an item critical to progress. But what I can mention is that the pieces of power that you find, they actually increase your movement speed in addition to powering up your sword. So getting past the traps, which are called traps, is actually very easy if you have a piece of power. And another thing that the piece of power does is, well, I'll mention it when we get the dungeon item, because it actually affects the dungeon item in particular. Oh, and also, to get out of this room, you have to shove that enemy into the hole. Really easy considering what the piece of power does. It just shoves the enemy all the way across the screen. It's really awesome. So as I was saying earlier, the only item in that part of the dungeon is the stone beak that you can use on the owl statues to get some additional clues. It's not critical to your progress, so if you know all the clues already, you don't really need to spend the key just to get it. But I actually forgot one of the important clues in this dungeon, so I'm glad I picked it up. You can also see that they've reintroduced the crystal switches from A Link to the Past. Hit these and all of the blocks that are in the floor will rise up, and all of the blocks that have risen up will fall back into the floor. They aren't color-coded, oddly enough, which is weird, considering this game actually has color. You'd think they would color-code the crystal switch blocks. Or I should clarify, this version of the game has color, and it's weird that they didn't do any color coding for that particular dungeon mechanic. I'm also semi-annoyed that you have to actually backtrack in order to get this key, even after killing the enemies in order to make it appear. You have to go all the way around to grab this key, which somehow goes all the way back up to the top of the room so it can fall back down again. That's a little weird, isn't it? Alright, so moving on, the Bottle Grotto hasn't really shown itself to have any particular gimmick of some kind quite yet. There are more enemies that you need to flip over with the shield, getting some use out of the shield at least. No reason to actually kill them though, and in this room, you have to push these two blocks in the center of the room, and this is extremely annoying. Until you have the dungeon item from this dungeon, touching a pot or a rock on the overworld will cause that message to appear every single time you touch it, and there's another obstacle in the game that will do the same thing. So there are a couple of annoyances in Link's Awakening that should have been fixed. I assume they would have been fixed in the Switch remake. And we just have to go through a short side-scrolling area to get to this room. And that door at the top of the screen might look a little weird. It is a one-way door. You, apparently flatten yourself up against it and it spins you into the next room. I guess it's some kind of ninja door thing. I don't really know what it is for sure, but it functions as a one-way door. And in this room, we have the mini-boss, which I think is a Hinox. Those one-eyed giants from A Link to the Past that threw bombs at you. This one doesn't throw bombs, though. He seems content to just grab me and throw me across the room, which is doing a decent chunk of damage, but I've got a piece of power, and Hinox is very easy to spin attack. So now I just need to grab this fairy. Grab this fairy, thank you. That was weird. Hitboxes with flying objects are really, really strange. And we enter this room, which has a really interesting enemy. It is a sinkhole that drags everything towards it, even the other enemies. And the really interesting thing is that it actually causes Link to spin around as well. So your movement isn't really affected, but it is possible to whiff your sword strikes because the game will think you're facing a different direction than you intended to move in, because the thing is also spinning you around as it sucks you towards it. Really interesting concept, and they're going to use it a couple more times throughout the game. And in this room, we have Boos, the ghost enemies from Mario, and you apparently don't scare them off by looking at them, you just have to light the room up. boos have lost a bit of their power from the Mario series, it seems, transferring into Zelda. Anyways, in that room, we get the power bracelet, which means we can now lift these pots. And the thing I wanted to mention earlier is that having the piece of power actually makes the animation for lifting the pots a lot faster. So that's pretty cool. That's a very free small key to get. And as we move on, we see that we have to take advantage of a new mechanic with the crystal switches. If you are standing on one of the blocks that is sunk into the ground and then you hit the switch, it will actually cause you to be standing on top of the blocks and you can move across them until you drop down to the lower level. Pretty interesting idea. Now, I accidentally went into this room and spent a key to unlock it. You do have to come into that room eventually, but now is not the time. I actually have to do something with this room first. And because I did not know what the hint to what you're supposed to do with that room is, I had to go through this side-scrolling area. Very brief area to have to go through, and the hint that I need is on the other side of the tunnel anyways. So I'll just be smashing these Goombas to get some hearts back, and then lose them to the piranha plants. Yet another Mario cameo. Did they really need to make so many Mario cameos? Well, considering the nature of this game, I guess it's okay, but, you know, couldn't you have drawn just like a different plant? You didn't need to recycle all of the Mario enemies. Now I want there to be a Zelda Mario crossover, an official one. You could just use the Link's Awakening engine, it would work perfectly fine. So apparently the piranha plants are also hesitant to rise out of the ground if you are near them, so you do have to lure them out just like in a Mario game. And after jumping past all of this, the hint that I needed was that you are supposed to kill the enemies in this room in a particular order. First you have to kill the Pulse Voice first, which is an enemy from Zelda 1 that you would normally kill with either music or arrows, but apparently just hitting them with a pot works just fine. If you kill those enemies in that order, you get the boss key, and that's what we need to advance to the final room of the dungeon, where there will be, of course, a bottle-themed boss, apparently. Hope it's something new, instead of a retread of a boss from A Link to the Past. And I also hope that it doesn't go down in just 2 hits, but I don't have a piece of power this time, so that's probably very likely. And in this room, they have an interesting puzzle. You need to hold that pot and go up the stairs while carrying the pot. Don't ask. And then having the pot will cause you to weigh down that platform more than it would if you were just standing on it normally. If you just stand on it normally, you're not heavy enough. So, who is the boss of the bottle-shaped, bottle-themed Bottle Grotto? Why, who else but the genie in a bottle? That's pretty clever, I guess. And he's apparently invincible without his bottle, so this starts a rather annoying long phase of the fight where you have to dodge fireballs for a good minute or so before he goes back into the bottle. And then what do you do but use the dungeon item? This is the first game where you actually have to use the dungeon item on most bosses. Well, you couldn't in the Tail Cave because the Moldorm is weak to the sword and you don't really do much with a Rock's Feather besides just dodge the enemy attacks. But here you have to pick up the bottle and smash it into the wall with the power bracelet. And there's actually additional dialogue in this version because apparently they thought it wasn't going to be easy to figure out what you're supposed to do here without another line hinting that you're supposed to destroy the bottle itself. Like when you swing your sword at the bottle, it stops moving and then it says something that it doesn't say in the original version of the game, hinting that you have to smash the bottle into the wall, which makes me wonder, why does the enemy tell you exactly how to beat it? This is a problem with most Zelda bosses. There are certain attacks where if they just wouldn't use them, you wouldn't be able to counter them and do things like this. Now that the bottle has been destroyed, the real phase of the fight begins, and he actually decides to try attacking you. Every time you hit him, he will go invincible for a couple of seconds, and a fun thing I like to do is to try to time the spin attack so that its hitbox is crossing over his the instant it's active again. So, just a couple of spin attacks and he goes down, and the second dungeon is cleared. And Link was moving without moving any of his body parts for just a split second there, and I thought that was funny to look at. So the second instrument is a conch horn. Are conch horns an actual instrument? Like, I've seen them in cartoons a couple of times, but I've never actually seen one played myself, but apparently it is. That'll do it for this video, though. Next time we take on 2 more dungeons and a bunch of other quests in the meantime. See you for that, everybody.